When my grandfather died, my entire family believed that my older brother had inherited the $3 million. Nobody questioned it. My older brother had always been considered Grandpa's favorite. He was the successful one in the family. He was confident, ambitious, and everyone believed Grandpa trusted him more than anyone else. So when Grandpa died, everyone naturally assumed that the family fortune would go to him. I never corrected anyone. That probably sounds strange, maybe even cowardly, but at the time, I didn't see any reason to correct them. Grandpa had been gone for less than a week, and the last thing I wanted was to stand at a funeral reception, arguing with relatives about money. Besides, I honestly believed my brother would inherit most of the estate. He had worked with Grandpa for years. He understood the family business. He had sat beside Grandpa during meetings, traveled with him, and learned how the company operated. I had always taken a different path. I loved Grandpa just as much as my brother did, but my relationship with him wasn't built around the business. Mine was quieter. We talked. We went for breakfast. We fixed things around his house. Sometimes, we'd sit on his back porch for an hour without saying much at all. When I was younger, I thought those quiet moments meant he wasn't as interested in me as he was in my brother. As I got older, I realized I had been wrong. Grandpa just had a different way of showing love. Still, at the funeral, nobody was thinking about that. They were thinking about the estate. I heard relatives whispering near the coffee table. "He'll probably take over the business. He always wanted to run it. Your brother was practically trained for this." One of my relatives even said, "I wouldn't be surprised if Grandpa left him the whole fortune." I was standing close enough to hear every word. I said nothing. My brother was across the room talking to our parents. He looked exhausted, but he also looked certain. At one point, my mother walked over to him and put her hand on his shoulder. "Your grandfather trusted you," she said. My brother nodded. "I know," she smiled. "You'll make him proud." I remember watching them and thinking that maybe everyone was right. Maybe Grandpa had left the money to my brother. Maybe the business and the investments would all stay with him. Maybe that was simply how Grandpa had decided to divide his life's work. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel jealous. I was grieving. That was all I could think about. The night after the funeral, I went home and sat at my kitchen table with one of Grandpa's old voicemails playing on my phone. It was nothing important. He had called me a few weeks earlier to ask if I wanted to have breakfast with him. His voice sounded exactly the way I remembered it. Home. A little rough. Always slightly amused. I listened to the message twice. Then, I put my phone down. I didn't know it then, but 3 days later, everything I thought I knew about my grandfather's final wishes would change. 3 days after the funeral, I received a call from his lawyer. I almost didn't answer, because I didn't recognize the number. When I finally picked up, a man's voice said, "Is this Grandpa's grandchild?" "Yes." "This is the attorney handling your grandfather's estate." My stomach tightened. "Okay. I'd like you to come to my office." "Is there a problem?" "No." He paused. "But I'd prefer that you come alone." Oh, that sentence stayed with me. I asked when he wanted me there. He gave me a time. I spent the next several hours wondering why he needed to see me privately. Maybe Grandpa had left me something sentimental. Maybe there was a letter. Maybe there was some personal item he wanted me to have before the rest of the estate was discussed. I never once imagined that I was about to learn something that would completely change the way I looked at my family. The lawyer's office was quiet when I arrived. He greeted me and led me into a small conference room. There was a folder on the table. Beside it was a sealed envelope. My name was written across the front. I recognized the handwriting immediately. "Grandpa's. I just stared at." "Did he write that?" I asked. "Yes." My voice became quieter. "When?" "Some time before his death." The lawyer sat across from me. "Your grandfather was very specific about how this was to be handled." I looked at the envelope. "What did he leave me?" "I think you should open it." My hands were shaking when I broke the seal. Inside was Grandpa's final will. I started reading. The first part confirmed what everyone had assumed. My brother would inherit the family business. There were provisions concerning the business property, operations, and ownership. I wasn't surprised. Then I reached my name. I stopped. I read the paragraph again. And again. I looked at the lawyer. "Is this correct?" "Yes." I looked back at the page. Cash, investments, accounts, assets that, together, were worth approximately $3 million. $3 million. I couldn't process it. I actually laughed once, not because anything was funny, because my brain didn't know what else to do. But everyone thinks my brother got this. The lawyer nodded. I know. I stared at him. How? Your grandfather anticipated that assumption. I didn't know what to say. My brother had the business. I had the money. It was almost the exact opposite of what everyone believed. Then I reached the next section, and my relief disappeared. There was a condition. I was not allowed to tell anyone about the money for 6 months. I looked up immediately. 6 months? Yes. Why? The lawyer leaned back slightly. Your grandfather was very deliberate about that. But why would he do this? I can't answer that for him. He didn't tell you. He gave me instructions. What kind? That the 6-month condition was important. I stared at the will. I don't understand. He pushed the sealed envelope toward me again. There is another letter. I opened it. It was only 1 page. Grandpa's handwriting filled most of it. He started by telling me that he loved me. He told me that money was never meant to determine my worth. Then he explained why he had created the condition. His words were simple, but they hit harder than anything else in the room. I want to know who loves you when they believe you have nothing. I stopped. I read that sentence again. I want to know who loves you when they believe you have nothing. I sat there staring at it. Then I read the rest. Grandpa explained that he didn't want me to announce the inheritance immediately. He wanted me to live normally. He wanted my family to believe exactly what they already believed. That my brother had inherited the fortune. That I had received little or nothing. He wanted me to watch. Not manipulate anyone. Not punish anyone. Not use the money to make people jealous. Just watch. He wanted me to see how people behaved when they thought there was nothing to gain from me. I folded the letter carefully. My eyes were burning. I suddenly remembered something Grandpa had told me years earlier. We had been sitting in his truck after picking up lunch. He had looked at me and said, "You can learn a lot about someone by what they do when they think nobody important is watching." At the time, I thought he was talking about business. Maybe he had been talking about family. I left the lawyer's office that afternoon carrying the will, the letter, and a secret worth approximately $3 million. Nobody knew. Not my parents. Not my brother. Not my relatives. Nobody. And suddenly, the family gathering I had been dreading became something completely different. I had to go home and pretend nothing had changed. That was harder than I expected. The first family dinner after the funeral was at my parents' house. My brother was there. So were several relatives. The conversation quickly turned toward the business. My father asked my brother, "Have you talked to the employees yet?" "Not everyone," my brother said. "I'm still getting organized." My mother smiled proudly. "You'll figure it out." My brother leaned back in his chair. "I've already got some ideas." Everyone listened. I sat quietly. One of my uncles asked, "So what are you planning to do with everything?" My brother hesitated. "Everything? You know what I mean." The uncle laughed. "The business, the money, all of it." My brother smiled. "We'll see." I watched my mother glance at him. She looked proud. Not just proud, relieved, as if the future of the family had been secured. Then she looked at me. "And you'll be okay, right?" I almost didn't understand the question. "I'm okay." "You know what I mean." I did. She thought I had been left with nothing. "I'll be fine," I said. My father nodded. Good attitude. That was it. No one asked what Grandpa had left me, because everyone had already decided the answer. Over the next few weeks, I started seeing the change. My brother's phone seemed to ring constantly. Relatives who had barely spoken to him began calling. One cousin wanted advice about a job. An uncle wanted to discuss a possible business opportunity. Someone asked if my brother could help them financially with something. Another relative suddenly started inviting him to lunch. My brother loved it. I could tell. He enjoyed being the person everyone wanted something from. He started talking more confidently about the future. "I've got plans for the company. We can expand. Grandpa built something good, but there's room to grow." Everyone encouraged him. Nobody questioned whether he had actually inherited the money. They simply assumed he had. One evening, my brother and I were sitting outside after a family dinner. He looked at me. "You doing okay?"
Yeah. He nodded.
"You know you can always come to me if you need something." I smiled. "Thanks." He looked almost uncomfortable.
I mean it?
"I know." He stared toward the yard. "Things are going to be different now." I asked, "How?" He shrugged. "I'm responsible for a lot." Then he smiled. "Grandpa finally trusted me with everything." I didn't correct him. That was probably the hardest part. I wanted to tell him. Not because I wanted to take anything away from him, but because I wanted him to know Grandpa hadn't forgotten me. Instead, I remembered the letter. I want to know who loves you when they believe you have nothing. So I stayed quiet. The first, truly painful moment came when my parents started making plans around my brother's supposed wealth. We were sitting at dinner when my mother said, "Your brother should probably start thinking about helping with the family expenses." My brother laughed. "Mom, I haven't even figured everything out yet." "I know, but you're in a different position now." Then she looked at me. "That's why you need to be careful." I asked, "Careful about what?" "Your spending."
I stared at her.
"I don't spend much." "I know, I'm just saying." My father joined in. "Your brother has opportunities now. You don't want to compare yourself to him." I looked down at my plate. I hadn't been comparing myself to him. They were. And they had no idea how strange the situation actually was. A few days later, another relative asked my brother for money. I wasn't supposed to know about the conversation, but I happened to be nearby when it happened. The relative lowered their voice. "It's not a loan I'd need forever." My brother said, "How much?" The number was substantial. He hesitated. Then he said, "I'll think about it." The relative thanked him repeatedly. Afterward, my brother looked almost proud. "You know," he said to me, "it's nice being in a position where I can actually help people."
He nodded. I'm sure.
He smiled. "I wish Grandpa could see this." I didn't answer, because suddenly, I wondered whether Grandpa had known exactly what would happen. The next month, I started noticing something else. Some relatives treated me differently. Not openly, nothing dramatic. They simply stopped asking me to come to certain things. Stopped calling. Stopped checking in. If my brother arrived, people gathered around him. If I arrived alone, conversations barely changed. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Then one evening, I walked into my parents' kitchen and heard two relatives talking. "It's probably better to go through him now."
Why?
"He's the one with the money." They didn't know I could hear them. I walked away. I didn't confront them. I went into the bathroom, closed the door, and stood there for a minute. I wasn't angry. I was hurt. There was a difference. For years, I had thought these people cared about me because they were family. Now I was learning that some of them cared about what family could provide. And there were moments that made it even more complicated. My mother wasn't cruel to me. She still called. She still asked if I was eating enough. She still worried about me. That was what made everything harder. My parents weren't monsters. They were simply convinced that my brother had become the successful one, and I had become the less fortunate one. Money had changed their expectations, even without actually changing anything about me. That was exactly what Grandpa had wanted me to see. One afternoon, I found myself sitting in Grandpa's old workshop. The family hadn't completely cleared it out yet. I ran my fingers over his workbench. I remembered being a kid, and watching him repair things. He'd always told me not to throw something away just because it was broken. "Understand how it broke first," he'd say. I thought about that. Maybe people were the same way. Maybe Grandpa hadn't given me $3 million simply because he thought I deserved it. Maybe he had given me enough distance to understand my family. I found another old memory that day. A small notebook Grandpa had kept in the workshop. I opened it. Most of it was business notes. Numbers.
Names, dates, reminders.
I wasn't supposed to read through his private things, so I closed it. But before I did, I noticed something. One page had been folded over. On the edge, Grandpa had written one word. Family.
I stared at it, then I put the notebook back.
I didn't know what it meant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Grandpa had been thinking about something much bigger than money. The months passed. Then 2. Then 3. By the 4th month, my brother had become completely comfortable with his new position. He talked like the business belonged to him. Maybe in a way, it did. That was his inheritance. But he also believed he had received the financial fortune. And everyone treated him accordingly. At a family gathering, my father raised a glass. "To Grandpa," he said. Everyone lifted their glasses. Then he looked at my brother. "And to the future of this family." Everyone applauded. My brother smiled. I smiled too. But inside, I felt something changing.
Not anger.
Clarity. I had started the 6 months, hoping Grandpa was wrong. I was beginning to realize he wasn't. Still, there were people who surprised me. One relative continued treating me exactly the same. They never asked my brother for money. Never treated me differently. Never seemed interested in what either of us had inherited. They simply asked how I was doing. That mattered. It showed me Grandpa's test wasn't designed to prove that everyone was selfish. It was designed to help me see the difference. And then, just as I thought I understood the purpose of the 6-month condition, the lawyer contacted me again. His message was short. "We need to discuss something your grandfather left instructions about." I called him immediately. "What is it?" "I'd rather explain in person." I went to his office the next morning. This time, there was no sealed envelope waiting for me. There was a file. He placed it on the table. "This was not part of the material I gave you initially." I looked at him.
"Why?"
"Because your grandfather specifically asked me to wait." I opened the file. The first page contained information connected to the family business. Then, I saw my brother's name. My name, and a date. The date was from before Grandpa died. Before the funeral. Before the family had started assuming my brother inherited everything. I kept reading. There were references to the business, ownership, and certain decisions that were supposed to happen after the 6-month period. I looked up. "What is this?" The lawyer folded his hands. "Your grandfather wanted you to see it at the appropriate time."
"Why?"
He didn't answer directly. I turned the page. There was a handwritten note at the bottom. Grandpa's handwriting. My heart started beating faster. The note was only a few lines. It said that the inheritance was not the only thing I needed to understand. I read the sentence again. Then, I looked at the date. Grandpa had written it months before his death. Long before anyone in my family knew what the will said. Long before my brother began behaving like he had inherited everything. I looked at the lawyer. What did Grandpa know? The lawyer was quiet. I closed the file. "There's more, isn't there?" He nodded once. "But your grandfather was very clear that you shouldn't see everything yet." I felt a chill.
"Why?"
"Because he wanted the 6 months to happen exactly as he planned." I looked down at the folder. For months, I had thought the secret was the $3 million. Now I understood that the money was only the visible part. Grandpa had known my family would assume my brother had received everything. He had known how they would treat me. He had deliberately created the 6-month silence. But now there was evidence that he had also made plans connected to the business and the inheritance before he died. Plans I didn't understand. Plans my brother apparently didn't know about. I left the attorney's office, carrying the file. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table and opened Grandpa's letter again. "I want to know who loves you when they believe you have nothing." I had read that sentence so many times that I almost knew it by heart. But now, it sounded different. It wasn't only a question anymore. It was a warning. And as I looked at the documents Grandpa had left behind, I realized something that frightened me more than the idea of losing my family's approval. Grandpa hadn't simply predicted how my family would behave. He had prepared for what would happen after they showed me who they were. The 6 months weren't over yet. And I still didn't know what Grandpa had discovered about the family business. Why he had separated the business from the $3 million, or why he had left instructions that would not take effect until after the secret period ended. I closed the file. For the first time, I wasn't wondering whether Grandpa had made the right decision. I was wondering what he had known that I still hadn't discovered. Because the more I learned, the clearer one thing became. The $3 million had never been the biggest secret. And whatever Grandpa had been preparing for, he had made sure I would be the only person in the family who could see it coming. I read that sentence in the note, again, then again. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table, with the folder Grandpa's lawyer had given me, the original will locked away in my desk, and the private letter beside my coffee. For the first time since Grandpa died, I felt something other than grief. I felt uneasy. Not because of the money. The $3 million still felt almost unreal to me. I had barely touched any of it. I had followed Grandpa's instructions exactly, and kept everything quiet. What bothered me was the business. Why had Grandpa given my brother the entire family business if he knew something was wrong? And why had he left me the money? I called his lawyer the next morning. He answered on the second ring. "I'm glad you called," he said. "You knew there was something else." There was a pause. "I knew your grandfather had concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "I can't tell you everything. Your grandfather asked me to keep confidential until the appropriate time." I closed my eyes. "Then tell me what you can." He was quiet for a moment. "Your grandfather wanted you to observe." "Observe what?" "Your family." I looked down at the letter. "I've been doing that." "I know. And I don't think this was only about finding out who loved me." "No," he said. "It wasn't." That answer made my stomach tighten. What did Grandpa know? "I think you should come in." I went to his office that afternoon. He placed a thin folder on the desk between us. "This is not part of the will," he said. "Your grandfather prepared it separately." I didn't touch it immediately. "What is it?" "Information concerning the business." I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a financial report. The numbers didn't make sense. The business was valuable, very valuable. But there were also outstanding obligations, loans, equipment leases, and several large payments scheduled over the following year. I looked at him. "Is the business in trouble?" "Not exactly," he said. "But it requires careful management." And Grandpa knew that? He knew it very well. I kept reading. There were notes in Grandpa's handwriting beside several pages. One said, "Watch who asks for ownership before asking about responsibility." Another said, "Never confuse confidence with competence." I stared at that one for a long time. My brother had always been confident. He had always spoken as though every room belonged to him. At the funeral, I had watched him stand beside Grandpa's casket and accept condolences with a calmness that almost looked like pride. I had assumed he was grieving differently. Now I wasn't so sure. "Why give him the business?" I asked. The lawyer folded his hands. "Because your grandfather believed your brother needed the opportunity to prove what kind of man he was when responsibility was placed directly in his hands. And if he failed, your grandfather made provisions for that?" I looked up. "What provisions?" The lawyer shook his head. "That's something you'll have to discover over time." I almost laughed. "Grandpa really loved making people work for answers." The lawyer smiled faintly. "He did." That evening, I went home and looked at my life differently. For the first time, I understood that Grandpa hadn't simply divided an estate. He had divided responsibility. My brother had received something everyone could see. I had received something nobody could see, and Grandpa had wanted it that way. The next family dinner was at my parents' house. My brother arrived late. He walked through the front door talking on his phone, then sat down beside Dad. "I think we're going to be able to expand next year," he said. Dad smiled. "That would be great." Mom looked at him proudly. "You sound so confident." "I've already got some ideas." I sat quietly at the other end of the table. Nobody asked me about my work. Nobody asked me how I was handling Grandpa's death. Instead, the conversation stayed focused on the business. My brother talked about equipment, staffing, contracts, and what he wanted to change. At one point, Dad leaned toward him. "You know, your grandfather always said the company needed new energy." My brother smiled. I guess he knew what he was doing. I nearly looked up. The irony was almost painful. He had no idea Grandpa had left me the money. He had no idea Grandpa had specifically prepared me for this. He had no idea that every confident statement he made was giving me another piece of the puzzle. Then Mom said something that caught my attention. "You'll probably want to think about helping your cousin Mark get started." My brother frowned.
Why?
"He's been talking about opening a small business."
Ew.
"He could use some help." My brother laughed. "Mom, I just inherited a company. I didn't inherit a charity." Everyone laughed. I didn't. Because 3 weeks earlier, Mark had called me. He had asked if I could loan him a few $1,000s. He had specifically said, "I know you're probably not in a position to help right now, I had told him I couldn't. He had accepted it, without complaint. That mattered to me. He hadn't known about the $3 million, he hadn't pressured me. And now, sitting at that table, I realized something Grandpa had wanted me to notice. The difference between people who wanted money, and people who wanted me. A few weeks later, my brother called me. Can you come by the office? The business?
Yeah.
I almost said no. Instead, I went. He walked me through the building, like he was giving me a tour of something he had owned for years. This is going to change, he said. What is? Everything. He pointed toward the front office. I want new furniture there. Then he mentioned new equipment. Then, another expansion.
Then hiring.
He spoke quickly. I listened. Finally, I asked, have you talked to the accountant? About what? The financial report. What financial report? I looked at him. The one Grandpa kept. His expression changed for half a second. Then he smiled.
I'm handling it.
You're sure?
I'm not a kid.
I didn't say you were.
He sighed.
I know what you're doing. What? You're comparing yourself to me.
I stared at him.
He continued. Everyone always did that. Grandpa included. I said nothing. He leaned against the desk. You know, I think Grandpa finally realized I was the one who could carry the family name. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it hurt. Because it explained something. My brother believed the business was proof that Grandpa had chosen him. He didn't see it as responsibility. He saw it as validation. And Grandpa had apparently known that too. The 4th month passed. Then, the 5th. By then, I had become almost numb to the little changes in my family. Some relatives called my brother constantly. Some wanted business connections. Some wanted advice. One aunt suddenly started inviting him to every event. Another relative told Mom that my brother was finally in a position to help the family. Nobody said anything like that about me, because nobody knew. But there were exceptions. My mother sometimes still called me just to ask how I was doing, not often, but enough that I noticed. One night, she called me. How are you?
I'm okay.
You sound tired.
I am.
There was silence. Then she said, I know things have been different since Grandpa died. They have. I hope you know I love you.
I swallowed.
I know. She hesitated. Your brother is doing well. I know. Your father and I are proud of him. I know. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked, Are you angry? I looked around my quiet apartment.
No.
That was the truth. I wasn't angry. I was learning. And there was a difference. The 5th month was when I found the next document. I was visiting the lawyer's office again, when he handed me a small envelope. This was left in your grandfather's personal files. I recognized his handwriting immediately. My name was on the front. I opened it. Inside was a single page. Grandpa had written, You may be wondering why I gave your brother the business. I stopped reading. My hands tightened around the paper. It is not because I believe he is better than you. I continued. It is because a person should eventually be given the responsibility they believe they deserve. I stared at that sentence. Then, I read the next one. Your brother has spent years believing that success means having control. I want him to learn that control is not the same as responsibility. I took a slow breath. The next paragraph explained that Grandpa had spent the final year of his life watching how my brother handled certain decisions inside the company. There had been no dramatic scandal, no hidden criminal operation,
No secret crime.
It was something more ordinary, and somehow more revealing. My brother had repeatedly pushed for decisions that benefited him personally, instead of protecting the long-term health of the business. Grandpa had stopped him several times. My brother had argued. They had disagreed. Eventually, Grandpa realized that my brother didn't understand the difference between owning something and being responsible for it. Then I read the line that made everything click. If I leave him the business, he will believe I rewarded him. If I leave you the money, you will know I trusted you. I had to put the letter down. For several minutes, I just sat there. Grandpa hadn't wanted me to compete with my brother. He had wanted us to become responsible for our own choices. Then, I noticed something written at the bottom. There is one more thing. I looked at the lawyer. What? He nodded toward the page. I read the final paragraph. Do not tell them before 6 months. Not because I want to embarrass them. Because 6 months is long enough for people to forget about inheritance and start revealing themselves naturally. I felt tears in my eyes. Then I read the final sentence. When the 6 months end, you will know what to do. That was all. The 6th month arrived quietly. There was no dramatic countdown. No announcement. Just an ordinary Monday morning, when I looked at the calendar and realized the date Grandpa had chosen was only 2 weeks away. I should have felt excited. Instead, I felt tired. For 6 months, I had watched people treat my brother like a wealthy man. For 6 months, I had watched people treat me like someone who had been left behind. And Grandpa had been right. Money hadn't changed my family. It had revealed them. Some people had disappointed me. Some had surprised me. And a few had reminded me that not everyone measured love in dollars. My brother, however, had changed the most. The business wasn't doing badly. But he had started making decisions that worried even some of the employees. He had spent money quickly. He had announced plans before checking whether they were realistic. He had borrowed against future revenue to fund expansion. And when I asked him about it once, he laughed. You worry too much. Maybe I did. But I remembered Grandpa's note. Never confuse confidence with competence. Then, one afternoon, my brother called. I need to talk to you.
Okay.
About Grandpa. My heart tightened. What about him? I found something. What? He paused. I think he left more instructions. I didn't answer. What? He said, I found a note in the office. I sat down. What did it say? I don't know. You just said you found one. I haven't opened it. That sounded strange.
Why?
Because it has your name on it. I closed my eyes. Of course it did. Where are you? At the office.
I'll come.
When I arrived, my brother was standing behind Grandpa's old desk. The envelope sat in front of him. My name was clearly written across it. He looked at me. You know what this is?
No.
It was the first lie I had told him about Grandpa. He picked it up. I think Grandpa left it for you. Then give it to me. He didn't. Instead, he said, do you ever wonder why he gave me the business?
Yes.
Do you think he thought I was better than you?
No.
Why not? Because Grandpa wasn't that simple. My brother looked away. For the first time, I saw uncertainty in his face. He had spent 6 months believing he had won. Now he wasn't so sure. He handed me the envelope. I opened it. Inside was another letter. This one was shorter. You are almost at the end of the 6 months. I looked at my brother. He was watching me. I continued reading silently. If you are reading this with your brother nearby, do not tell him anything yet. My heart began beating faster.
Then,
there is something he needs to understand before you tell him about the money. I stopped. My brother noticed. What does it say? Nothing important. He frowned. You're lying. I folded the letter. No, I'm following Grandpa's instructions. His face changed. What instructions? I didn't answer. For the first time since Grandpa died, my brother looked genuinely afraid. Not angry.
not arrogant, afraid.
And that was when I understood that he knew there was something he hadn't been told. I looked back at the letter. The final paragraph was written in Grandpa's handwriting. Your brother will eventually have to choose between protecting his pride and protecting the business. Do not make that choice for him. Then, underneath it, Grandpa had added one final sentence. The truth about the money will matter less than what he does when he learns what the business is really worth. I stared at those words. The business. What it was really worth. Suddenly, all the pieces came together. The financial reports, the warnings, my brother's spending, Grandpa's separation of the estate, the 6-month condition. It wasn't only about who loved me when they thought I had nothing. Grandpa had also been preparing my brother for the consequences of believing he had everything. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. My brother looked at me. What did he say? I met his eyes. He said, "You have 6 months to prove him wrong." My brother went completely still. What does that mean? I don't know. That was another half-truth. I did know. At least enough to understand that Grandpa had left both of us a test. Mine was about people. My brother's was about responsibility. and neither of us had realized it until then. 2 weeks later, the 6 months ended. I woke up early that morning. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was hiding. I looked at the letter on my desk. Then I looked at the account statement, showing the investments Grandpa had left me. Approximately $3 million. 6 months earlier, that number had seemed like the most important thing in the world. Now, it didn't. I finally understood Grandpa's sentence. I want to know who loves you when they believe you have nothing. He hadn't meant that everyone who failed the test was evil. He understood people were complicated. He simply wanted me to stop confusing family connection with family loyalty. At noon, I called my parents. I need everyone to come over tonight. My mother asked, why? I'll explain when you're here. My brother came too. So did several relatives, who had spent the previous 6 months treating him like the future head of the family. Everyone sat around my parents' living room. My brother looked at me. What is this about? I took a breath. Grandpa's inheritance.
The room went quiet.
My father looked at my brother. My brother looked at me. I said, there is something everyone needs to know. My mother whispered, what? I looked at my brother. You didn't inherit the $3 million. His face went blank. My father sat forward. What are you talking about? I said, my brother inherited the family business. Nobody spoke. Then I continued. I inherited the money. My mother stared at me. How much? Approximately $3 million. My brother stood up.
No.
I didn't respond. No, he repeated. That's not possible.
It is.
Grandpa told me the business was mine.
It is.
So what are you saying? I'm saying he divided his estate exactly the way he intended. My brother looked at our parents.
Then at me.
Why didn't you tell anyone? Because Grandpa instructed me not to. For 6 months?
Yes.
He sat down slowly. One of my aunts covered her mouth. Another relative stared at the floor. I saw people remembering things. The requests. The comments. The way they had treated me. My brother finally asked, why? I pulled Grandpa's letter from my bag. Because of this. I read the sentence aloud. I want to know who loves you when they believe you have nothing. Nobody moved. My mother started crying. My father looked ashamed. One aunt whispered, oh my God. My brother stared at the floor. Then he said quietly, he knew.
Yes.
He knew what I would do. I don't think he knew exactly what you would do. My brother looked at me. He knew enough. That was the hardest part. Because Grandpa had never wanted me to humiliate him. He had wanted him to grow. I handed my brother the final letter. He read it silently. When he reached the part about the business, his expression changed. You knew? I knew Grandpa had concerns. You knew the business wasn't worth what I thought. I knew it had obligations. He looked at me. Why didn't you tell me? I thought about Grandpa's final instruction. Because Grandpa said I couldn't make your choices for you. My brother sat back. For a long time, nobody spoke. Then he said something I never expected. I thought I finally proved I was the one he loved most. I shook my head. He didn't rank us. My brother looked down. He gave you the money. And you the responsibility. He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. I spent 6 months thinking I was the winner. So did everyone else. My mother wiped her eyes. And we treated you like you had nothing.
He nodded, yes.
She looked devastated.
I am sorry.
I believed she meant it. But an apology couldn't erase 6 months. It could only acknowledge them. One by one, some of my relatives apologized. Others didn't. A few became defensive. One said, we didn't know. I answered quietly, that's the point. They had acted according to what they believed. And that was exactly what Grandpa wanted me to see. A few days later, I met my brother at Grandpa's office. He had changed. Not completely, but enough. He had stopped talking about expansion. He had stopped making decisions just to prove something. I talked to the accountant, he said.
Okay, I've got a lot to fix.
You do. He looked at me. Are you going to help? I thought about it. I'll help you understand the documents. He smiled faintly. But you're not giving me money.
No, he nodded.
I figured. We stood quietly for a moment. Then he said, "I owe you an apology." "You do. I was awful to you." "You were. And I believed Grandpa loved me more." "I know." He looked toward the window. "Did you ever hate me?" I thought about that before answering.
No. Why?
"Because Grandpa taught me something." "What?" "That people can disappoint you without becoming strangers." He looked at me. "I don't know if I deserve that." "Maybe you don't." He smiled sadly. "But you're still my brother."
Yes.
That was enough. Not forgiveness.
Not yet.
Just honesty. I never spent the $3 million to prove anything. I invested it carefully, exactly as Grandpa had intended. I helped the people I genuinely wanted to help. And I learned to say no without feeling guilty. That was probably the most valuable thing Grandpa left me, not the money. The ability to see people clearly. 6 months earlier, I had believed the hardest part of losing Grandpa was losing him. I still missed him. I probably always would. But now I understood something he had tried to teach me, without saying it directly. Love isn't measured by what people say, when everything is going well. It's revealed by how they treat you when they think you have nothing to offer them. My grandfather had known that. He had known my family. He had known my brother. And, maybe most importantly, he had known me. When he left my brother the business and me, approximately $3 million, he wasn't declaring one grandchild better than the other. He was giving each of us something we needed. My brother needed responsibility. I needed perspective. And for 6 months, my family gave me exactly what Grandpa had wanted me to see.
Some people stayed.
Some people changed. Some people disappeared. And a few surprised me by caring about me, even when they believed I had inherited nothing. That's what I remember most. Not the number in the account. Not the shocked faces around my parents' living room. Not even the moment my brother realized the fortune wasn't his. I remember Grandpa's handwriting. "I want to know who loves you when they believe you have nothing." He had given me $3 million. But the truth was, he had given me something worth much more. He gave me 6 months to find out who my family really was, and the courage to stop measuring my worth by what they thought I had.